on the rise. Our city received $154 million of federal funding through the American Rescue Plan in 2021 and will receive another $154 million in the coming weeks. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and we're investing in what matters most to our residents, like affordable housing, mental health resources, and support for small businesses, workers, and our neighborhoods. Federal funding is a critical part of our strategy to build back Denver's economy in a way that is equitable, sustainable, and supports the communities most impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, especially communities of color and our most vulnerable residents. Now is our time to rise together. We came out to the community last year, and we're coming to you again to hear directly from you on the final round of federal funding. Register today to be part of a telephone town hall where you can share your priorities and participate in online surveys to help inform the city's economic recovery strategy. Head to risetogetherdenver.org to join the conversation.
What the Denver Police Department and our partners, both state partners and federal partners, are doing is primarily targeting the high-level drug dealers. Areas that are more difficult is the low and mid-level dealers that we are seeing currently that are contributing to this overdose death epidemic. We need every partner to come together to figure out solutions because the pandemic has hidden this epidemic of fentanyl that is creating these deaths at alarming rates, and bring awareness to the issue so that way we can collectively try to tackle this problem.
Welcome to the Safety, Housing, Education, and Homelessness Committee of Denver City Council. The Safety, Housing, Education, and Homelessness Committee begins now.
Welcome to Wednesday, June 8th Safety Committee. I am Councilwoman Jamie Torres, Vice Chair of this committee. Councilman Cashman, I believe, is joining us on Zoom. We will start with introductions of those in the room and then move to Zoom. And I'll start to my left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kevin Flynn, Southwest Denver, District 2.
Good morning, Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
Thank you. And online.
Paul Cashman, South End, District 6.
Thank you, Councilman Cashman. Ibaka? Go ahead. Get that repaired for question and answer time. Councilmember Sedibaka, representing District 9, is also on Zoom. And to my left, Council President.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Stacey Gilmore, District 11.
Thank you all so much. And I failed to mention that I proudly represent Council District 3, which is West Denver. We have a couple action items today, but all under, I think, a single agenda item, and it is our eviction legal defense agreements presentation. And I'm pleased to welcome Melissa Tate from Housing Stability, where she is one of the directors. Thank you for being here, and we'll hand the floor over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Melissa Tate. I'm the Housing Stability Director with the Department of Housing Stability, also known as HOST. I first wanted to frame this conversation in the context of our 5-year housing plan. City Council approved our plan last year. We have a 5-year goal of reducing the number of evictions filed by 25% by 2026, from an average of 8,800 to 6,600 per year. This year, we also have a goal to serve more than 6,000 households with stability programs. And within that goal, we're also striving to provide eviction legal assistance to at least 2,000 households, and in doing so, increase the proportion of low and moderate income households who have legal representation when facing an eviction. You'll likely recall a 2017 report titled Facing Eviction Alone from Colorado Coalition from the Homeless and Colorado Center on Law and Policy, which found that while landlords had representation in every case reviewed, tenants were only represented by an attorney in 1 to 3% of the cases reviewed, and that the assistance of an attorney significantly improved tenants' chances of remaining in their homes. I also wanted to share the most recent eviction filing data from Denver County Court. As shown here, we have seen fewer eviction filings in Denver since the beginning of the pandemic. So far this year, the number of eviction filings have remained lower than pre-pandemic levels, with the exception of March, in which we saw slightly more eviction filings than in March of 2019. I do want to mention that while this data is incredibly helpful, it does not provide us with the full picture. What is not captured with this data is the number of informal evictions that may be occurring, as tenants may self-evict when they're unable to pay rent, or may leave due to intimidation or threats of eviction. For background and historical context, this is a timeline of the evolution of the eviction legal services over the last 5 years. In 2018, City Council led and funded a pilot program with Colorado Legal Services to provide free eviction legal services. In 2019, Colorado Legal Services was awarded funding to continue the program under the housing team, which was then under Denver Economic Development and Opportunity, and again in 2020 under HOST, which was created in October of 2019. In 2020, HOST issued a procurement for programs and services across the newly formed department, and Colorado Legal Services and Colorado Affordable Legal Services were both awarded to provide eviction legal services. In 2021, we issued another procurement for $1 million for eviction legal and prevention services, and Colorado Poverty Law Project and the community firm were awarded. Also in 2021, City Council adopted the Tenant Legal Services Ordinance, which I'll talk more about in the next slide. And today we're before you amending contracts to add additional funds and extend those contracts. In June of last year, City Council adopted an ordinance for tenant legal services. As outlined in this ordinance and subject to appropriation, meaning funding for these services, the intent of the article is to codify access to free legal services and representation for low and moderate income households experiencing eviction. And just to define that, low and moderate income means households with an income at or below 80% of the area median income, as defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Recently updated figures for 2022 in Denver is $62,600 for a single person household and $89,400 for a 4-person household. The intent of the ordinance also was to require the creation of an annual report that analyzes implementation and performance metrics. As we have not yet had a full year of data, nor was all the data required being collected under contracts that were executed prior to the creation of this ordinance, this is a report we'll be working on, which will give us more detail on the outcomes of these services, including what services were provided, how many households received these services, were able to prevent an eviction, and remain in their homes. how many had to move but avoided an eviction on their record, the average cost of providing these services, demographic information including incomes and race ethnicity, and additional information. Though not required by the ordinance, we will also be evaluating where households receive services live and how it compares to where we see high rates of eviction, so we can further identify gaps and better target outreach. Lastly, outlined in the rental licensing ordinance, which was also passed last year, and within this ordinance, is the requirement that landlords provide the tenant rights and resource document created by the city when they are signing a new lease, when serving an eviction notice, and when an affordable housing provider issues a notice to terminate a tenant's subsidy. This requirement went into effect January 1st of this year, and the document was created and made available in English and Spanish last fall. As previously mentioned, we'll be working on a more comprehensive report on eviction legal services. As a high-level overview, this is a breakdown of households served by year. In 2019 and 2020, we had one service provider and served 601 and 558 households, respectively. In 2021, we had two service providers for the first half of the year, and starting mid-year last year, we have had four providers serving over 2,300 households last year and over 1,100 January through April of this year. Included in these numbers is full and limited legal representation, which I'll define in the next slide, as well as other eviction prevention services, including free legal education clinics and referrals, housing navigation, and targeted young adult education material and self-advocacy services. The previous slide was total households served across all providers and services. As a subset of total households served, this slide shows the number of households served with full and limited legal representation. So it doesn't include the number of households served through educational legal clinics, housing navigation, et cetera. To define limited and full legal representation, limited representation is more for cases where there's a need for legal advice and guidance. It works best for cases that are not technical or complex or do not require court appearance. Service providers may provide legal advice and guidance on the eviction process, support with completion or correction of documents, review documents provided by the court or landlord, and other services. Full representation is more in-depth and provided in cases in which the service provider may be appearing in court, negotiating on the client's behalf with opposing counsel or landlord, advising the client in drafting correspondence and documents, ensuring the correct forms, pleading, and other documents are completed and filed on time. And although we do not have the full report, I did look back on the monthly 2022 reports, and the vast majority of households provided full or limited representation were able to stop the eviction and remain in their home. This slide demonstrates how funding for eviction legal services has grown over time and the different funding sources that have been utilized to expand programming. 2022 and 2023 are estimates, as these contracts are multi-year contracts. So for example, if less is used in 2022, more may be available in 2023. With increased funding, it's important to note that it takes time for our partners to build capacity through hiring and training. We also know that we need to do more in terms of outreach, so residents are aware that these services are available and free for low and moderate income households facing an eviction. If the contracts before you today move through council are approved, approximately $2.6 million will remain available for the rest of 2022 and 2023, as approximately $1.2 million has been spent since January of 2021. Some other points I want to highlight as it relates to this work in terms of increased data collection and analysis and coordination. In late 2020 and early 2021, we worked with Denver County Court and UC Berkeley's People Lab to analyze eviction data to show where in Denver we see the highest rates of eviction. We have since used that information to help us target outreach to residents regarding resources, comparing households served with emergency rental assistance to those areas, and working with our data team to build the infrastructure to continue to monitor those trends. As previously discussed, we have increased the data collection from our eviction legal service providers to align with the tenant legal service ordinance reporting requirements. My colleague, who is incredible, Carissa Johnson, Housing Policy Officer, oversees these contracts and has, in partnership with the eviction legal service providers and others working in the eviction prevention policy and program space, created a working group who meets bi-weekly to discuss questions, concerns, trends, policy ideas, updates, and more. Lastly, over the last couple of years, there's been incredible effort to improve coordination between eviction legal service providers, rent and utility assistance providers, host staff, community navigators, and others to ensure we are best meeting the needs of our residents to help prevent evictions and keep people in their homes. We've also built a much stronger relationship with Denver County Court, ensuring that they're aware and sharing with tenants and landlords information about available resources. Every month, I gotta say, I'm inspired by the positive impact stories that our eviction legal service providers share in their monthly reports. We have some of them here today, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk about some of their experiences providing these services. I wanted to make sure that we share how residents can access free eviction legal services, which they can do by contacting any of the 4 organizations listed here. Additional information about available resources for residents can always be found on our website, denvergov.org/housing. We have 3 contracts before you today. The first contract here is with Colorado Legal Services, which we are amending to add $105,000 in Affordable Housing Fund dollars for a new total of $1,217,520. The additional funds will be utilized to hire a social worker, which has been identified as a gap in need to provide clients with complex financial, social, emotional, and medical needs. This contract term will remain January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2023. The scope of work under this contract is for lawyers and paralegals to provide tenants with free legal information and advice, full legal representation, as well as education outreach, referrals for resolving eviction matters, and additional resident supports. Under the 3-year contract, approximately 1,800 households will be served, approximately 600 per year, with the majority of those served, or 1,500 households, provided full and limited legal representation, and 300 or 100 per year with education and outreach services. The next contract before you is with Colorado Poverty Law Project. We are adding an additional $900,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funds for a new total of $1,355,152 and extending the contract from a previous end date of June 30th of this year to December 31st of 2023 for a new contract term of July 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2023. And I apologize. Contract term of July 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2023. Services include providing eviction prevention legal advice and representation, housing navigation, young adult outreach, and referrals. This contract is expected to serve approximately 5,575 households, 975 of those with full and limited legal representation, 450 with housing navigation, 3,250 with young adult education and self-advocacy services, and 900 with Know Your Rights clinics. The last contract for you today is with the community firm, which adds $600,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funding for a new total of $984,000 and extends from an end date of 7/31/2022 to December 31st, 2023 for a new contract term of August 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2023. The scope of this work is to provide free eviction prevention advice, eviction legal defense, and other free eviction prevention services. Approximately 1,100 households are expected to be provided full and limited legal representation under this contract. So the action requested today is the approval of the following 3 resolutions amending these contracts. And with that, happy to take any questions. And as I mentioned, we do have some of our service providers here as well.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We have Councilmember Sawyer, then Flynn in the queue. Oh, and let me welcome Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval, District 1, to the committee. Go
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate all you're doing for the residents of our city, and I have to say I'm thrilled to hear not only about the number of residents that we have helped, and by we I mean you, have helped stay in their homes, but also the stories of harm reduction that we're hearing with the supportive services are just so incredibly important and something that I know this council is really passionate about. So really excited to see the initial outcome of the legislation from last summer. So thanks, you guys. Couple of questions for you, or maybe for you. What is the average cost of a full legal representation case? Do we have that information? When we put together kind of the financial estimates when we were initially bringing the legislation to formalize it, it was like a best guess for us. And so if we have that information in a more concrete way, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, we can follow up. So that is something that we've been tracking as part of our new contracts. Generally, I would say before that, we've looked at, it depends between, limited and full legal representation, but generally we see a range between like around $700 per household served.
Is that for full legal, we think?
I think like 600 on the 600 to 800 side. So
yeah, we'll average it at 700. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. So when we estimated the funding last year, we also included a bit of money in our estimate for marketing services and a full, I believe, is $100 and maybe $150,000 for an FTE. Have we fulfilled that, or where do we stand on those things?
Sure. So we have requested additional funding for marketing and outreach just generally across the department, because in not just these services, but written utility assistance and other services, we want to make sure we're getting the information out there. So I think we're doing okay in that space. We did also hire a program manager on our team, and so the housing stability team is currently mostly fully staffed. We just had a promotion. We'll be replacing that person, but otherwise I think we're in good shape in terms of managing the contracts and overseeing the programs.
Okay, that's great. That's really good to know. The reason I'm asking is because, it's budget season, so if there was additional funding needed for something like that,
we would ask. Yeah.
Let's talk. Okay, that's great. So part of the other, I guess, back to last summer, part of the conversation we had was in limiting the access to these contracts to residences where the people who were being evicted made less than 80% AMI. Sure. We had talked about the potential of reviewing that data and seeing if it was based on spending and availability of not only of contractors, but also of their availability to take on more cases, right. Opening that up. Right. Is that something based on the data that we're seeing that you would recommend?
So we will, that is part of the report that we'll be producing. So how many households were denied services and what was the reason for denial, whether that includes, income qualification. So something that we'll be looking at further. It's not a recommendation I would make at this time.
Okay. When you're pulling together that data, there will be a gap because there are a number of people who are not even trying to access the services because they know they're over 80% AMI. Yeah. So I don't know how we capture something that doesn't happen, but if it is possible to even anecdotally sort of gather that information, sure. I think it would be really helpful for us because while I know there must be a number of people who try and access the services and are denied because they're over that 80% AMI income qualification, it would be good to estimate, sure. How many, or even see the number of how many other evictions are occurring in the city that are not at 80% or below, yeah. to help us make that determination of whether we need to open this up to everyone based on funding levels and staffing availability and things like that.
Yeah, we can look at eviction filing data as well as some of digging into a little bit more about the outcomes of those. What's difficult is that demographic information isn't collected as right. part of eviction filing, so we don't have an idea. So it will be generally an estimate of what we think and what we see through the data that we have available to us, but really difficult to pinpoint income levels of all the eviction filings.
Yeah, I totally get it. If we can just do our, best guess, it would be great, because we would definitely need estimates in order to be able to make a determination of whether we should do something like this, and I personally believe that we should. So, if there's a way that we can get that information or guesstimate at that information, that'd be great. One of the things that we had talked about in committee a couple of weeks ago was Council President Gilmore's legislation that she's working on, that's coming through council now. I believe it was in Mayor Council this week or next week, to clarify the laws around foreclosures. And the question that I asked during that committee, I'm going to ask you now, which is, do we have the bandwidth to, and is it possible to include foreclosures in legal assistance for foreclosures as well? So obviously, we have a whole population of renters that we're, could potentially support at a higher level above 80% of AMI. We also have a number of foreclosures that are happening on people's homes. It's different legal proceedings, but equally as unclear and frustrating for those residents who are also losing their homes to foreclosure. So is there a way for us to get that data? If there is that something you think we should consider as we are considering updating this ordinance in a number of different ways?
So I do think that there's value in creating legal services for homeowners facing foreclosure or having issues or concerns with their HOAs. That is a proposal we're thinking about in terms of budget asks for next year. It would require us to do a procurement, because it is a different expertise that's needed to take on those cases versus eviction. And so we would want to procure and find out who may be willing and able to provide those types of services. Opening it up to the ordinance itself, I think could be okay, but it's a matter of what's the capacity and ability for providers to step into that space, as it's not something that we've funded historically.
Okay, that's great to know. And as you come back to report on some of this other data a little bit further down the road, I'd love to have that information, because same thing with the above 80% AMI, if there is a need and a way, and this ordinance allows for that to be included, it's something that I think that we should do. So appreciate that. Question for you around, the idea of adding staffing for our service providers, right? So one of the contracts had specifically requested staffing for a social worker to help assist. I guess I'm curious and need to know more around why it is, because we get this all the time, right? It's not only from service providers providing eviction services, but we had the same request come through from CVC when we were talking about safe outdoor spaces, right? It appears that our service providers who are doing an amazing job need this additional support. We have DHS, which is funded at an extraordinary level compared to some of the other agencies in our city. Why is there a disconnect there? I'm certainly not saying that I'm not supportive of it. I absolutely am, but I do kind of want to understand why it is that we already have an entire agency in our city that exists solely to provide this kind of support, and yet our service providers are not either able to access that or it's not specific enough. Where is the gap here?
Sure. I don't know if there's a gap. I think that there is a strong need, and Denver Human Services does an incredible job, and we partner with them often. But when we think about households coming into the eviction space and who need some additional assistance, it is often difficult to say, okay, now you go call them or go to this office. If we have them in front of us and we can provide those additional wraparound support services where they are and meet them where they're at, that's always going to be kind of a best case scenario. Address the concerns when they're there versus referring out all the time. And so we think about that across many of our programs. I think we're seeing that a lot with rent and utility assistance programming as well. It's just a need for more case management. So we have this long-term goal of success and stabilization versus just issuing payment and hoping for the best. There's just a greater need for some folks.
Okay, and absolutely get that, and want to make sure that we're providing the support that we need. So that's sort of why my question. So if there is this need, and it's not necessarily a gap, because of course DHS is doing a great job, but what we've identified is if we got the people there, we should do it there. Yeah. How does that long-term support work? Is there a handoff at some point, or is it something that then sort of stays in this program and is funded through this program forevermore until the potential evictee is stabilized on their feet?
Yeah, I think with the social workers, specifically with Colorado Legal Services, it is somewhat of a pilot. We've seen it be successful in other communities where they've provided those services, and so I think that's a bit to be determined. But generally, we look at these contracts kind of each year or each time we do a procurement, and what is the need, how do we best meet that need, and then what is the funding available to provide those services.
Awesome. Okay, really appreciate that. And then one more question, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair. Okay, thank you. So one of the things that Councilwoman Sita Baca and I have continued to work on, and now that we're sort of post-pandemic talking with the courts about, is setting up an eviction court. So in the same way that we have some specific courts that are for specific things within the city and county of Denver, we feel that an eviction court would be an extremely useful, powerful tool for our, to help support our residents and also help support our service providers, host, everyone, to be able to really have a focused goal. And wondering whether that is something you all have kind of considered, thought about. It was a part of the discussion in our original conversations when we were formalizing the ordinance last summer for this. And obviously we would love to see that set up. But wondering whether, I guess, our service providers would like to see that as well. Would it be helpful for you? Would it provide the support, additional support that you all feel like you need as the legal representation for people who are potentially being evicted? I'd love to maybe hear from our service providers on that to see if that's something that would be, valuable and worthwhile.
Tom, do you want to take a?
Thank you, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tom Snyder. I'm the president of the Colorado Poverty Law Project. I'm also a partner at the law firm of Kutak Rock, and so we've been a recipient of grants from the city of Denver here now for 2 years, and we really appreciate working with you all. Denver's a terrific partner of ours in what we do. Councilwoman Sawyer, to your specific question about eviction court, we certainly would support an eviction court that was geared just to this specific subject matter. The city of Denver has been a phenomenal partner of ours. The certain county court judges have been good partners of ours over the years as well. But I will say that there is still an incumbency inertia in the Denver County courts that prevent due process for many tenants going through that process. There's been a lot more attention. There's a lot more legal representation now for tenants, which is phenomenal from the organizations that are here. But the county court is set up for speed and efficiency. The landlords essentially still run the Denver County Court. The whole process is set up so that evictions can be processed and done quickly and efficiently. The landlords have unbridled access through texting and phone calls to judges' clerks that we oftentimes do not have. They're able to set dates, cancel dates, continue dates without our knowledge, and we oftentimes don't get notice. And they also are able to oftentimes file motions, frankly, for default after our answers, and make representations just as a matter of course, after our answers have actually already been filed. They're improper motions, but the county courts just accept it because it's part of the process. So I'm sorry to come on a very positive meeting and air dirty laundry to you all, but that was your question, and so I felt like...
And I really appreciate it because that's what we hear from our residents as well. And I don't know the status of it, but I believe there will be a vote on the ballot, a measure on the ballot, citizen-initiated ordinance in November around some of these issues. And so, and I'm not convinced that that will actually solve the problem, right? It essentially would open this program up to 100% of everyone who's being evicted as opposed to the 80% AMI, which was our compromise to ensure that we had the proper data before we really moved forward with opening it. But I'm not sure that will solve the problem. And this is super helpful information to hear what our service providers are seeing and finding, because if you, who are the experts in this, are having that same experience that we're hearing from our residents who are being evicted, that's incredibly concerning. If we did something like an eviction court, in your experience and opinion, do you think it would address some of these challenges?
I think with adequate rules of procedure that accompany the structure of the eviction court, it would. Right now, the county court rules of procedure there's major gaps in them. Rules have been repealed and not replaced. It is not clear about how the process is supposed to work, and even if it were, it often doesn't work that way anyway. I know that you all are familiar with the fact that a lot of these court filings are barely in English, and many of the tenants don't speak English anyway, and so they're very difficult to understand. And then when you graft on top of that a very confusing process that's not written down anywhere, it really is difficult for a pro se tenant, much less, and also for us attorneys to work it through. So I think that an eviction court that's not just dedicated necessarily to the subject matter area, but also has clear rules of procedure that will be followed, would solve a lot of this. And this is not going to make me popular with the Denver County Court judges, and we value them and we work with them.
It's all right. I'm not popular with them either. I'm just teasing.
And some of this is probably done without their knowledge, but we're all complicit in it, frankly, to the extent that we don't speak up and say something about it. And so anyway, I appreciate the question. So I do think that with procedures associated with an eviction court, a lot of these issues would be resolved.
Okay, I really appreciate that feedback. Thank you. And I would love to follow up with you offline and maybe have a little bit more in-depth conversation about some of your recommendations, and and other service providers who might be here as well. Councilwoman Sitabaca and I would love to chat with you further about any potential thoughts or recommendations that you have as we consider this kind of program.
I'd love to do that, Councilwoman Sawyer, and I know that we have strong opinions amongst the tenant advocacy group too. I think I'm carrying the water here for the consensus view from our side.
Okay, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Council President Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman Sawyer, for your line of questions and really pulling in the foreclosure mitigation resources that I think my council office specifically, but then also the host office and our Office of Financial Empowerment and Protections have seen. The number of staff hours alone of individuals sitting within meetings to just problem solve around getting a tracking mechanism in place, how we're deploying resources, and then those follow-ups. And I have to say that both Jay Salas and his team and Britta and her team have been wonderful to work with and really appreciate it. And wanted to give Melissa maybe an opportunity to share a little bit more around if we're looking at possible procurement of a service provider in the 2023 budget ask. Could you share with folks really what that third party does and what are the services that they really can provide to not only tenants, but then also folks that might be looking at foreclosure proceedings?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we'd be thinking about the procurement is somewhat similar to the eviction legal service providers in that there's probably 2 layers of services that could be provided. There's a way that they just answer questions, give advice, give guidance, show them where forms are, what is the process, kind of more high level. But also what we're seeing, especially right now with some of the households who are facing foreclosure, is the need for really that representation on their behalf and showing up to court proceedings, filling out documents on their behalf, maybe meeting with and negotiating with the mortgage lender or the HOA. And so then I think those two layers of services will need to be provided.
Okay, that's that's really helpful. And around the counseling services that are provided, I know sometimes there's questions from both tenants and homeowners about the privacy that's related to that. Could you share a little bit around how that works?
Yes, there would always be privacy measures put in place, similar with our eviction legal providers. They're not sharing information that is confidential. And so that data is always, that data and information is always protected, and would be so for homeowners as well.
Great, I appreciate that. And one of the issues that we did run up against was where we were trying to get a good indication of what was the amount of fees and fines, what was maybe some demographic information, et cetera. That would be something that I would ask as you're looking at a procurement, because there is such privacy. Once somebody signs on to work with a housing counselor, it's really private information then, rightly so. Yeah. But where we could, in some way, shape, or form, get information, maybe not tied back to the specific name of the owner, the address, et cetera, keep that private, but it would behoove us to get a bit more high-level statistics, et cetera, around what's really going on. And so I wanted to understand as well with this procurement, and it probably won't be as big of an issue going forward. Thank you, Governor Paulus, for signing House Bill 1137. There's a lot of protections in that bill, and the amount of fines that could be assessed are now $500 total. But will there be, or are you looking at setting up some sort of fund within the city if a homeowner does get into that situation? That has been an issue because we as the city can't just say, oh yeah, we'll pay. And for some of our homeowners out in GVR, it was over $20,000 that they owed. And we struggled to figure out, was that going to come through the mortgage assistance program at the state? Was it going to come through some of our dollars? And even gathered private philanthropic partners to also help. And so that we're not scrambling if we get into the situation again, I would just ask that there's some sort of consideration of at least a fund that would be available to pay down that $500 total if we do get into that situation.
Yeah, that is part of our 2023 budget request as well. Obviously, the state has the Emergency Mortgage Assistance Program, which they're currently working on expanding and bringing on additional partners. And that is federal funding through Treasury's Homeowner Assistance Fund. But we do see a gap, and especially when the hardship may be unrelated to COVID, which oftentimes in these cases it was. And so having more general fund dollars available to step in is also part of our 2023 budget asks as well.
Great, I appreciate that. And I'll just leave you with one issue that we are currently still trying to solve for in Green Valley Ranch. There were issues with the driveways and when they were poured. And so if you pour concrete and the temperature is not correct, the concrete kind of slushes off, and that has happened to a particular homeowner, and they bought the home from a previous owner, but they are now grandfathered in to fixing that issue. And we're currently looking at about a $6,000–7,000 price tag of repouring a 3-car driveway to get a property owner back in good standing with the HOA. And, I think we figured out a way through our housing partners to possibly, through an assistance program, apply for some of those funds. But that's also, I think, an opportunity where we can figure out where those different housing partners, or even if we could direct somebody to a meeby-weeby firm, a construction company, because the cost or the estimates that were being given to this one homeowner, interestingly so, the HOA recommended that particular contractor to the homeowner to work with. And rightly so, that individual was a little wary of doing that because they couldn't, level set if that was a good cost estimate or not. And so we still do have homeowners who are dealing with some of these other issues, even with House Bill 1137. There won't be new fees, fines, or interest added on, but they're still trying to clean up some of the earlier issues. So just appreciate the work on this and the continued partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sawyer, would you mind if we went to Councilman Sandoval? Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for all this work. In the slide presentation, I'm just wondering, do we have an estimate of how much it costs per person? I don't think I saw it in the slide, and if you did, just point me to it.
Nope, it wasn't in the slide deck, but previously asked. So we have been collecting that information, so we'll have a more kind of updated figure and broken out by service. But generally, we see about a cost of $700 per household across providers.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councilwoman Sawyer?
Thanks. So had two quick follow-up questions that I wanted to ask about. The first one is about sort of the rental registry, right? And this might be a question for excise and license, since they're the ones who actually are implementing that. But wondering if there is a way to use the rental registry or to track some of this data based on that rental registry. And I don't know exactly what that would look like or how it would work, but I think there must be like a nexus here somewhere between the evictions that are happening and the landlords. I'm making it super complicated in my head already, but wondering whether there is a clear way that you have seen based on the work that you're doing, or if our service providers have any feedback on that as well, to be able to find that nexus with the rental registry and use that information to be able to provide us some better data on these kinds of cases.
So I don't think they'll be collecting anything in terms of eviction filings or anything of the sorts. We have talked to excise and license about the opportunity of, oftentimes when new laws or ordinances are passed, we don't have a good way right now of communicating with landlords that those went into effect. And so it does give us the opportunity, as landlords start to register their properties, a way for us to better communicate with landlords about various tenant landlords' rights and resources that are available. Data collection, we'd probably want excise and license to weigh in, but I can say right now they're not collecting anything in terms of eviction filings.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks. And then last question was just around translation services. So you had mentioned, and we saw in our data as well, in researching this initial ordinance, that one of the significant challenges is that even as an attorney, I barely understand the legalese happening in an eviction. And then when we see that a significant portion of the people who are being evicted don't speak English as a first language anyway, that creates a real problem. I know Councilwoman Torres has been working on a language access program that is going to be established within the city. Wondering whether those translation services that will be coming can be accessed by our service providers in order to help support them in this work, or how that will work, and is that a conversation that has sort of come up previously?
Yeah, so we want to ensure language access across our program. It's something we've been hyper-focused on. and not just English, Spanish, but we know that we have a large refugee population, and so we often work with human rights and community partnerships and our community navigators to see, what are those top spoken languages throughout the city, who's accessing these services and what languages do they speak, and making sure that our documents, our programs, our applications, everything are translated. Similarly, our partners often, if not always, provide translation, interpretation services, and if they are unable, we can help step in. We do have a contract with Community Language Co-op, and so we reach out to them anytime we need support in that space.
I really appreciate that because as I represent East Colfax, and what we see there is, yes, the Spanish translation is super helpful, but it's Burmese and Amharic and Karen that we really see are the three languages, right? Farsi. Interestingly, not so much Farsi until recently, because when we do anything in East Colfax, we translate into 4 languages. It's always Spanish, Amharic, Karen, and Burmese. So if there is I guess, an opportunity to funding and bandwidth to expand the eviction protection resource guide into those languages, that would be valuable for my residents for sure. And if you've got additional feedback when it comes to translation services that we can provide to the team that's working on those translation services, would be super helpful.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Council President Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Sawyer, Nicole Kim is the individual at Excise and Licensing that is working on the portal for the rental registry. And we currently don't have, any data collection right now that would ask a landlord or an owner, how many evictions did you, if might be counterintuitive to ask that right now. We want them to opt in so that we can do better information sharing with the landlords and the property owners around if you do need to proceed with an eviction, here are the resources that you need to provide to the tenant and get better information out that way. But it wouldn't preclude us from taking that rental registry information and cross-checking it with our eviction defense partners and just seeing what the trends are and understanding that a little bit better, because I'm assuming that there are probably some trends out there that without data, it's a bit harder. We know in our gut that it's happening, but now we're actually going to have some of that data and contact information to even, sooner than later, I hope, be able to then communicate with a property owner or landlord and saying, we've seen this pattern. We want to make sure that you are aware of these resources, and perhaps there have been these changes to either state or city laws that we also want you to be well aware of, et cetera, around it. And so appreciate the question, and we'll continue to figure out how to track that and get resources out to the citizens of Denver that really, really need them. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Awesome. Thank you. And appreciate the line of questioning around language access. I think it's going to come up a lot as we contract with external providers, whether they're nonprofit or not. So I know that team is deeply involved in not just crafting, I think, what city department guidance might be, but how we then work with all of our community partners outside the city. Melissa, the conversation about eviction court got me wondering if host, if you do kind of a landscape assessment of what are the providers seeing as they're providing defense that could be system change opportunities, policy change opportunities. Is kind of that a Q&A or assessment done?
Yeah, so I think those bi-weekly meetings I talked about across service providers, also some folks for the state level judicial person, and then host staff are convening and having those conversations. We also recently met with the Denver County Court staff and the judges, just because there's a whole new set of judges that came in, and so we wanted to say, here are all the resources that are available, ask us any questions, what flyers, what information, what else is on your mind. Something else that came up through those conversations was the idea of having a housing navigator kind of on site who can both, help with potential relocation if needed, but also quickly paying emergency rental assistance applications. We, of course, have Colorado Legal Services already on site. And so it is just a constant conversation, and it has changed, right? We are seeing different things, as we talked about a little bit earlier, of need for that more long-term wraparound services as well.
Okay. I'm really curious about what we consider success in this realm, and what we're funding is representation, and that residents are represented may be the outcome of success that we're aiming for. But are there other things, like how often is housing preserved? How often is funding collected? I don't know what other kind of options there are, but just curious about that.
Yeah, I think obviously the goals in our 5-year plan, so reducing eviction filings by 25%. I think part of that is also trying to get folks involved in these services sooner. So not waiting until we're in front of eviction court or before I've gotten an eviction notice. As far in advance, if someone's behind on rent or even has questions about, I think I might get evicted, what should I do? That's when we want to be having folks coming into the doors. So that's part of it. Also, I think once we do this report, success to me is someone avoided an eviction on their record. We know that has long-term impacts on housing stability, access to additional housing in the future, health, moving schools, all these things. And also that they're able to remain in their homes long-term. So part of what we've been thinking through as well is kind of how do we get a survey or some way to reach out to residents and figure out, once you've received some sort of services across stability programs, did it provide that long-term stability that you were needing? So whether it's 6 months or a year later. Those are kind of the big ones that come to mind. Not much around funding, I would say.
Okay. The 3 contracts, are they all 3 extending to the end of 2023?
Correct.
What are these the primary providers of this service in Denver? Do you need to do an RFP after that point, or are these the folks that are really the primary ones in the field?
We may do another procurement in the future, but I would say across we have 4 providers currently, and I think they're all doing a tremendous job. I don't know that we need more providers, but maybe we need an expansion of services within those.
Got it. Okay. Not seeing any other questions in the queue. I would offer a motion for all 3 in a block. If I can get a motion in a second. Moved by Councilwoman Sawyer, seconded by Councilman Flynn. There's no objections. Great. We'll move these forward to the full council. Thank you. And thank you to all the providers here today. And we are adjourned.
Thanks for coming. Yes. Go to